To our Beyond Business Real Conversations, Brave Relationships, and Human Business. Okay, I'm loving, absolutely loving having this back up and running, new and improved. And we've also been having some really amazing guests on the show. I was really, really disappointed that I was away last week and missed Armando, but I heard that it was absolutely amazing. And it was a bit of a boys' club, I heard as well. So I'm glad to be back. Um, we've we've also got Arthur Kalos here, Arthur and Brahm LeGroux. We have been doing this for about 4 or 5 years now, and over the last, yeah, well, has it been that long? Maybe, I don't know, but it feels like it's a
Who's
long time.
counting, Kylie?
Yes,
No, I'm not. Who's
who's
counting
counting?
anyway? I'm
We're
not.
having too much fun to count.
Too much fun.
Um,
Yeah.
and what we decided was we wanted to really level them up this year and have really some amazing guests on, share some of their stories around entrepreneurship, leadership growth, business building, so that we could really support the listeners that were coming on and we really listened to what they were saying. So today we have a really special guest, and Andrew Gillies is my guest today, and I'm super, super excited to have you on. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Kylie. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Let me tell you a little bit about Andrew because the shift that you've had in your career is been really big, and I want to be able to link it back to what our audience really comes to these sessions for. So you have spent 35 years in law enforcement. 27 of those years you're an investigator and as a director of investigations at the Crime and Corruption Commission. You've handled some of the toughest, most high stakes situations to critical incidents right through to criminal investigations. From now, you've turned from 35 years in law enforcement over to leadership. You know, for me as the leader of an organisation, I want to know how you take decades of experience investigating complex, like high stakes situations and turn that into coaching that really transforms leaders. Like, how do you make that shift to really get people to transform into the change they want to see?
It's a great question, actually, and it's I'm still working on it, is the answer. But I think first and foremost, um, I really think that transition. It doesn't really matter whether it's crisis or whether it's just leadership in general. I think there's a real difference between the theory of leadership and the practical applications of leadership. And what I mean by that is, and there are so many working parts to that for me. So I so part of that is really getting to know yourself, really understanding yourself to the core, and that's the bit that I'm still really coming to grips with. But really getting to understand you and how you operate and what your values are and what your emotions are, in particular with men, because men just don't show their emotions, and that happens in the workplace as well. So really getting to know what your emotions are, getting to know who you are on a really deep level, so that you can then relate that to your staff. So leadership is no longer do as you're told, which is was when I first joined. It's now like the leader is not the most important person in the room. The most important person in the room is your staff. So how can I more appropriately and better relate to my staff to be able to change their ideas, or more importantly, to be able to get the best out of them, to get clarity from them, to get the best out of them, so that we can achieve what we want to achieve, whether that be personally, whether that be from the organization. And what I've also found is that by doing that, if you've got your personal vision, mission, if you've got your personal values lined up and they line up with the organizational values, and your staff are treated really well, you'll achieve those organization values and organizational goals that you need to achieve. So, um, Yeah, it's a really long-winded answer, I know, and there are actually various parts to this, I think, and it's something that really started for me when I started doing coaching, and it was conflict coaching about 7 years ago. I've now moved into coaching per se. Was the fact that people didn't know themselves. I would say 100% of my clients that I've had from a conflict perspective didn't know about emotions, didn't know about values, didn't know that people's needs and identity were really important. And these things created conflict. And once you understand that, you can then go, oh, okay, well, I can now understand why that person's behaving like that. So I need to change the way I'm now operating. Long-winded answer, but and there's more to it, but that for me is what's really important.
I love it. And I want to just summarize because you pulled out some really gold nuggets in there, and then I'll pass over to Arthur because I know he'll have a question. But there's a couple of real gold nuggets in there just for it to land with the audience is leadership is not just theory, it's application. And I talk about this around accidental leadership. So many leaders are put into a role because they're great technicians, great practitioners, great at what they do, and all of a sudden I'm a leader, but no one taught me how to lead. So I think it's important for people to understand that concept. The second really important part you mentioned was, previously it was command and control type of leadership. Whereas now we're seeing this collaboration, this connection, this empathy, this real important relationships that's required in order to bring out the best in people. And then the third element was know yourself first in order for you to understand what triggers you, where you've come from, the stories you tell yourself so you can lead better.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can go to that command and control really briefly, because I know that Brian and Arthur want to say things, but if I can go to that command and control, what's really interesting, and it took me, so everything you spoke about was me. When I was first thrown into a leadership position 15, 16 years ago as an officer in charge of a station, I thought I was ready for it. I'd been on the rank in a different position for 3.5 years. I was not ready for it. And my organization was not offering what I needed. So I had to go out and source it. So I went off and studied leadership and management. So there's the theory side of it. But if I can stick with command and control, because what I've actually found through coaching is that, and not just coaching, but also the experiences that I've had in different positions, and we'll probably talk about that later. But the really amazing thing about emergency services, like emergency services are under the pump, regardless of who they are. The public sector emergency services, they're all under the pump, but they will always succeed. Why is that? You've got some amazing people doing amazing jobs, and you've also got these policies and procedures, and everyone knows exactly what's expected of them. Not only is there a desire from these amazing people, but they know what's expected of them in every given situation. And the really interesting thing when you come into an office environment, all of that disappears. You're now on your own, and you're now having to work out conflicts. You're now having to work out personality types. If you've even thought about it, a lot of people go into these leadership positions and just think it's about them. And you'll understand this, Kylie, from your psychology. The personality types are so interesting and so integral to actually getting people working. And if you don't understand that, first of all, and if you don't understand that and get the best out of people, it makes it really difficult in that office environment.
Yeah, spot on, right? It's, and I know Bram will have something to say about that as well. He's our Belgian-born psychologist. But I'll pass over to
questions. Arthur. I'm going to kick off the interrogation. How does that sound, Andrew?
Create some conflict.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely right. Process, procedures, imperative in crisis situations. The main difference I feel and believe is everyone in that environment is definitely on the one agenda, not many agendas.
Yeah.
And the one agenda being getting the job done And so that was very interesting. Whereas in the work environment, there's different agendas, right? So that was really interesting. And having that poise, I think poise is a word that's not used a lot, but that's the word that comes to me when you've got the right processes, the right procedures, and you've all got the same agenda. That's when we are poised to work as a team in a crisis situation. Really insightful. I'll get to the reactions and emotions probably a little bit later in the questions, Andrew, if I may. But look, as you all appreciate, we're all a factor of, we are who we are today from the experiences that we've had in the past. I want to ask you, if I may, and if I may ask you this personal question is, what are the 2 or 3 experiences that you've had in your past in that life stage that has made you the person that you are today? What stands out in your mind?
Yeah, that's a great question, Arthur, and I'm actually finding myself again, if I can say that, and I'll explain why. It's really interesting because when probably the last 15 years in the police has been extremely different to the previous 25 plus. The reason is that I was very operational and very much a police officer. The last 15 years, I haven't been a police officer. I've been a manager, 15 plus. I've been a manager. And whether you're managing, for me, this is just my view, whether you're managing policing organisation or any other organisation, it's all about staff, and you're managing staff, you're managing policies, procedures, you're leading staff. That's very different to what I originally was doing for the previous 20 odd years. And to be honest with you, so much more challenging because you're dealing with, as you say, you're dealing with so many different factors, and managing people is a really interesting, it's a challenge. It's a really interesting challenge, particularly when you're not relating or they're not relating to you. So how do you do that is really interesting. So from a crisis perspective, I've actually jotted down a couple of things I've done in the last few years to just paint a picture of how very different it's been for me. So, about, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago, I was the officer in charge of a station on the Bayside, big station, 50 odd people I was directly, or 44 people directly responsible for, but 103 in the station. From there, other jobs I've done, I was actually the patrol group inspector up at Mount Isa. So in Mount Isa, you're dealing with very junior staff, but you're dealing with 23, it's the size of 23% of the state of Queensland. I had 15 stations that went from Mornington Island up in the Cape all the way down to a one-man station in Birdsville. So you can only get to Mornington Island by flying, and to get from Mount Isa to Birdsville was about an 8-hour drive, or it was a couple of hours in the plane, small plane. So I'm dealing with stations of 60 odd staff down to stations of 1 or 2 people. And I'm also dealing with very remote First Nations communities, which was an incredible privilege for me to be a part of. So from a leadership perspective, when you get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning from the officer in charge of a station like Doomadgee to say, we've got 150 people who are, for want of a better word, rioting in the street, what do I do?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a 5 or 6 hour drive away, and I don't have a plane for probably 3 or 4 days. So how do you say you're on your own, make the best of it? And what I came to realize after the first time it occurred, like I was in a flap, because I thought, gee, how do I manage this? So it suddenly occurred to me after reflecting on it that how I managed that was actually because they're so far into that situation, all you can do as a leader is to step right back from it and just support them. You are now the critical thinker for what they're doing, because they're so concerned about themselves, their staff, and the community. You are just sitting back and you are just asking them whether they've done things. Have you done this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And they're things that they would normally do, but because it's a crisis situation, they might not think of the things that you need to do. So really, that was incredible for me to think, what do you do? Or what you do is just be there for them. So my staff knew that whether 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, if anything happened like that, they could phone me and I would be the voice of reason. So that was...
Sorry, and that is opposed to you doing it for them?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep, absolutely. And because...
What if they were within a 2-hour drive? Are you out there and doing the same, or in that context?
I'm not out there. If need be, I'm out there, but I'm in the background. For me, it's all about being that transformative leadership and allowing them to have that empowerment. And as David Marquet would say in his book, that intent-based leadership is so important. You can't do it for people all the time. You need to empower them to be able to do it. That intent-based is so important. It's really important for me, for them to actually get to know my job so that they get that next level of understanding. So yes, by all means, I might be there with them, but they're the ones doing all the work. I'm just there as an extra support mechanism. That makes sense. So when I went to the crime,
in a crisis situation, it feels like everyone's in, like everyone just dives in, and whereas we actually even more, it's more of the opposite in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a bit like being a district duty officer or regional duty officer in real crisis situations, because while you're sort of calling your shots, you've got so many other people that are actually doing the work, and all you're doing is just providing that support, providing them with some ideas of what to do next. And you're actually working as a team, because your ideas are not always the best. It's the collective team ideas are the best. And what really struck me with this was when I joined the Crime and Corruption Commission, we would have really high level political meetings about, okay, and you had to be really precise with what you're doing. Same with ethical standards in internal investigations. Everything had to be really precise. There was so much, there was people's liberty at a really high level that you were talking about. So my meetings, for example, at the CCC and also within IIG, my team meetings, I would run them to begin with. And then I would say to the next person below me, you're running the next one next week, because I want them to get to understand what to do. At the CCC, and actually, funnily enough, in IIG as well, I would run my meetings and I wouldn't say anything. I would ask questions. And I was really interested in what the collective had to say. Because if I say something, then it might turn into be groupthink. And that's not what I'm after. I'm actually after the thoughts of other people. And a classic example for me was I was involved in, so I used to, one of the really unfortunate jobs that I had, but a really important job for the coroner and also for discipline within the internal investigations group, was I used to go to police shootings. So I was the primary investigating officer, even though someone was doing the briefs of evidence and doing all the work. I was the primary one. And I went to one up north not long before I had mandatory retirement. And when we finally, I had to do what I did. And when we finally got together, because the first thing we need to do is to remove criminality. We need to make sure that the police have acted ethically and not out of criminality. And this was a really difficult one. And for 5 hours, we went around the room and they kept saying, well, what do you think? No, I'll tell you what I think when we finish. And we went around the room and we had a a really experienced officer but she'd only been with this particular area for 2 weeks. And I said, "What do you think?" And she said, "What, me?" I said, "Absolutely. I want to know what you think." And she came up with something that was so important that no one else had come up with. And I said, "That is fabulous." And then at the end of it, I told them what I thought, but I really wanted to get that collective in the room. So you can sort of see from the Triple C to IIG, the way I eventually started to work, but that was only my last 5 years. I wish I had have known that 15 years before.
Hey, Andrew, I really got to jump in because I'm really excited about something that you just said. You just said something really interesting whereby I'm kind of hearing that you really learned to step back already just because of that remote location, which kind of being so geographically dispersed, it looks like it actually helped you to be able to step back and really let the team do the work, so to speak. But the interesting thing on the flip side there is where I'm just wondering if my thinking is correct here. By you basically asking the questions and letting the people share what you think before, so that you could actually get your head around things, you understand, you can see the picture coming together. This seems to be a pattern that you have been demonstrated, but one thing that I'm really curious about is how do you guard yourself against a preconceived idea, a cognitive bias, a certain outcome that you would like to see rather than what it actually is or turns out to be? Because the way that you said it, you were happy, from what I hear, to stand back and really let the puzzle pieces come together for you. But ethically speaking, how easy was that to do for you?
Listen, from a leadership perspective, that's really challenging. From a natural perspective, that's just naturally me. Even as a young investigator, I was always really interested in the truth. And I was really interested in, if I was interviewing a suspect, I had no preconceived ideas. And I was just really interested to ask questions, because I was just really curious, regardless of what it was. And fair enough, I had, you'd have your evidence, or you'd have what you'd already established.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes that evidence doesn't always show the right picture. So I learned to do that as an investigator very early. And the biggest challenge for me was, from a leader in the organization, was not to jump in. And I remember distinctly, I was a detective sergeant in a particular area, and I had a really serious offence that we were investigating, and we'd called people out, and I remember I got too far into the weeds, so I just didn't have that critical thinking, and I didn't have that the vision and the decision making ability while I was in the weeds. And I remember very distinctly being down there, and I got caught out. There were things that happened that I wasn't across. And I think that was many years ago, but I think that was probably a real wake-up call for me. And from a leadership perspective, I've just tried to do that. It's not always been the case, but that's always what I've tried to do.
Brilliant. The self-awareness piece there has definitely grown.
It's definitely grown. And I've got to say, the coaching for me, from a leadership perspective, has been vital, because when you're speaking to clients, and clients are you're trying to resolve a problem from you're actually inwardly saying, well, hang on, yeah, that's happened to me, and that's happened to me, and you're actually thinking about your own situation at the same time as you're solving their problems. And I think that's one reason I love the coaching, is because you've got to be really present to it, but you're solving other people's problems, but you're actually learning from it all as well. And that's the beautiful thing about coaching for me.
The interesting thing there that I picked up as well, many interesting things there, Andrew, was how business owners get caught in the weeds. And
So I didn't catch that, Arthur.
I was talking about how, in your example, how you were you found yourself in the weeds in that investigation. So whether you were too close to the detail or too emotionally attached to the outcome, you probably weren't at your objective best.
Arthur, you're turning a bit in a robot, mate.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So what he's saying, Andrew, I'll just repeat the question. I could vaguely hear the robot. So what he's saying is, you know, getting yourself caught in the weeds, but what you actually identified is when you were actually playing in that space and lifted yourself up, right? Yes, so that was it. How do you make sure you get out of the weeds in order to let the people feel empowered?
Yeah, that I probably oversimplified that actually, because that came to me over a few days where I had, you know, we might have had 30 or 40 staff in the room, and you know, as the person who's in charge of that, even at the lower rank, I think I was detective sergeant. I was sort of running that, and when I allude to the fact that I wasn't across things, there were things that were happening day to day, and I was just feeling this overwhelm. I was feeling it didn't happen straight away, but over a period of 2 or 3 days, I was just feeling overwhelmed by the volume of information, and that was a learning for me, because I had to step back from it all, and I had to allow people to actually do it, because I was becoming overwhelmed, in which case I can't investigate, in which case I've got the parents of, or in this case, it was an abduction of a young child. So I had the parents of this young child relying upon me to actually do my job, and I wasn't doing my job. So that stepping back for me was the first time that I actually realized that that's what you need to do in a leadership perspective.
Am I back, Kylie?
Yeah, you
am
are
I
back,
audible?
Arthur,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you look, that was good. What I was also, as a parallel to that example, thank you, Kylie, and thank you, Andrew, for sharing that experience, is as business owners, we can get caught into the weeds of the business, and we potentially lose our objectivity as you have. So I was just trying to point out that fact, because we're so emotionally attached to the outcome. And that example you just gave is probably a primary example where you found yourself so emotionally attached to getting an outcome for such a sad situation for the parents of the abducted child, where you had to have the fortitude to actually then step away.
Yes.
So that objectivity was restored in that situation. That must have been such a mixed bag of intense emotions for you. So I just want to call that out and commend you on that. That would have been so tough. But as business owners, I mean, that's crisis, that's next level. But as business owners, that same crisis might be a situation where the business is completely on the line on a fraud event or something like that.
Totally.
So the points I'm trying to raise here is, what are some of the tips, and this is probably a question more to the Kylies and the Brahms and Andrew, if you may, is what could business owners do to ensure that in crisis situations within their own business that they've founded and grown, how to make sure that level of objectivity is structurally in place should those crisis events occur?
I love it. It's such a great question, and I'll because I know we're getting close to the end, so there's so much gold out of here, and I really want to relate it back to those exact situations that you're talking about, Arthur. Like, how do we take someone that's had 35 years in law enforcement, high stakes crisis situations, but actually apply it to entrepreneurs, to business owners, to leaders, or you know, regardless of their industry or their role. I work closely with a conflict coach, a high conflict coach. And when we talked about crisis, I said, how are you defining crisis? Because when I think of crisis, I think of what Andrew's talking about right there. But crisis isn't. Crisis is how we define it. So
Mm.
that could be, we've got a massive project on the line. We could be, I don't know, struggling because we don't have the right staff. So crisis, I want everyone to realize it's your own definition. Okay, so you determine what crisis is. Okay, so for the business owners listening, I think the other thing that I'm taking from this, and I remember I also work very closely with an emergency physician, and we do coaching together. And I remember him talking about, a 3-pronged framework, which I think will be really, really highly relevant to what you're talking about, Arthur. He said, so we could get a phone call to say, we've just had a bus accident. We got 45 people coming in, critical condition. You got to get ready and have everyone on the floor because we need all hands on deck, right? So in that situation, you've got all of these huge amounts of things going through your head, which is that overwhelm that you're talking about, Andrew. He said he applies 3 frameworks. The first, what's the situation? Let's determine, what have I got going on? We've got a bus coming in. We've got 45 people critically injured, right? Next thing is check on my emotions. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? What's going on in me physiologically? Because I'm the leader. I need to control those emotions. I need to control that first. His third step in that is, what action do I need to take, right? I think what happens sometimes with leaders, and I see it all the time, especially in coaching, is they have the situation, the crisis, and they go straight to action.
Yeah,
okay?
totally.
And they forget to regulate their emotions. And I'm going to say, Andrew, with all of those stories you're talking about, you had to regulate your own internal self-talk, your own emotions, your own, what's going on for me here, in order to lead. So 3 steps: situation, emotion, and action. But Bram, I know you've probably got something amazing to say around this space as well.
Look, I'm going to keep it very short. It's very much in line with what you say, but I'll be keen to hear what Andrew has to say about it. One thing that I probably concur on you on is I think you got to be clear about the objective. Like, if you think objectively, you need a clear objective that is well defined in advance, which means if it's, for example, finding the child that has been abducted, well, it's a clear objective, which means the second thing then is it's about you aligning your values that you can remain objective and neutralize the feelings that might trip you up, like the hot buttons or whatever you want to call them. We all have them. The self-awareness piece is huge. That's right. And I remember working with the Submarine Corporation. They had a very interesting idea, which is take 3. This was for a safety environment, but take 3, I think, is a very good one. 3 steps. What's the outcome? How are you feeling? Yes. What is the action? So it's kind of in line with what you said, Kylie, but I think the intent needs to be clear. You can only bring your best if you keep a level playing head, and you got to keep your head and your feelings in the game. So I'm keen to hear, Andrew, because you seem to be like the conflict master with all the training and experience you got under your belt. And a lot of people out there sometimes use the phrases, I'll have a hard conversation. We got conflict in the workplace. But I personally always think that's because you got a skewed head that thinks that it's a problem rather than an opportunity. Yeah. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think perception's a really big one, and with that, not jumping to conclusions. It's a bit like having a performance conversation. You don't jump to conclusions because you don't know what's going on in that person's life. So yeah, that perception's really important. I think going back to what Kylie was talking with the 3, for me, it's the 5. It's the 5 whys. Always going back to the 5. In policing terms, we had an acronym called SMEAC: Situation, Mission, Execution, Administration and Logistics, Command and Control. And everything came back to that. So if you've got whatever framework you have, if you keep going back to that, and absolutely crisis, that's why I went through different things at different stages of my career, because they might have been a crisis at the time, but the next one arrives, and you think, well, that wasn't a crisis, this is now a crisis. It's whatever it is in each industry. I totally agree with that. And the other thing I was going to say, something I really have learned is around the neuroscience of the mind. You guys will relate to this. And that's only by doing a whole heap of reading and by doing a number of courses. And how the amygdala works and what the physiology of your makeup is actually doing, and how your amygdala is actually there to protect you. And actually understanding that in a work environment is really, really important as well. And I think the final thing from me is knowing your staff from a leadership perspective, knowing your staff really well during times of non-crisis.
Yeah.
So that during times of crisis, you know them, you know what they're capable of, and you know what they can do for you to resolve that crisis. And you're picking people based on what they're really good at.
I love it, Andrew. We always have a final question that we ask all of our guests, which is what I'm going to ask you in a moment. But I just want to wrap up, just for everyone that's listening, is that, there's some real key points that Andrew's talking about, and that is being calm under pressure. It's about showing up confidently as a leader and not thinking you have to know all the answers, but making sure that you're actually getting people to what do they think? What do you think? I love that. It's a great question. It's about being there and being that voice of reason, coaching and empowering, and a really supportive role. So I think everyone can take that back to their role as a leader, regardless of whether you've had 35 years in crisis management like you have. The final question that I want to ask you, Andrew, is, if the listeners could just take one action away from the gold that you've shared with them today, what would it be?
Oh, one action. Really get to know yourself. Who are you? What's formed you? We call it the core of a person is the ages of 0 to 7, and then the learnings from there on. So who actually are you and how are you formed today? And actually get to know you, because there are some weaknesses that I've got that I've become aware of in the last 5 years. I was such a much better leader in the last 5 years than I was before that. And part of that was because I started to get to know me. And more importantly, I was aware of some of the vulnerabilities that I had, so that I could lean on others who didn't have those vulnerabilities, or I could identify those vulnerabilities and do something about it. And that for me is where the neuroscience with how the brain works comes into it. Because at times I will fight, at other times I will just shut down. And getting to the point where if you're going to shut down, what are your preventative strategies that you can utilize so you don't shut down, so you can be there for your team? Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I love it. Leadership's a journey. It's not a destination, right? And I think you've summed it up. Learn yourself in order to, I always say, if you're not growing, then how are you growing others? Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your time.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to have our sessions each fortnight, and I look forward to our next fortnight session. Do we have a guest yet?
We do. I think it's my guest. I think it's the marvellous Phil Fagan. The guy that did that to my nose on Sunday.
I love it. I'm excited to hear him actually as well.
I reckon the viewership might be through the roof for that one, I reckon. Hit up half 10 rounds.
Yeah,
sounds like some physical conflict there.
Oh, yeah. He's the only guy that can punch me in the face. I'm not angry at him about it.
You're welcome it.
Yeah, exactly right.
Beautiful.
Hey, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Love to meet you. Well done on a great career. Thank you for your
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, mate. Thanks, Kylie.
Thank you.